The screech of brakes pierced the night silence as Sergeant James Carter parked his patrol car at the entrance of the municipal dump. The heavy air carried a putrid smell that no longer bothered his nostrils after 15 years on the force. His tired eyes scanned the vastness of debris illuminated by the car's headlights, searching for any suspicious movement that would justify the anonymous tip received minutes earlier. It was his last shift before forced leave, 3 months of psychological leave following the incident that cost his partner's life in a pursuit gone wrong. Lonely nights in the patrol car had become his refuge since then, a way to escape the pitying looks from his precinct colleagues and memories of his failed marriage to Rachel, who left him 2 years ago, tired of competing with his work for attention. Police badge number 2547 weighed heavily on his chest as a constant reminder of his choices. Rachel used to say he had married the job long before meeting her, and perhaps she was right. The long hours on duty, middle-of-the-night calls, and the constant feeling that there was always one more case to solve had eventually eroded what they had built in 7 years of marriage. At 38, James found himself alone, immersed in an empty routine that only gained meaning when he put on his uniform. The badge on his chest was like an anchor keeping him steady, preventing him from completely losing himself in the drift of his dark thoughts. A subtle noise cut through the night silence, making James instinctively grip his revolver's handle. Years of street experience had sharpened his senses. He turned off the engine and waited, letting his ears catch any suspicious sound amid the wind blowing through the mountains of garbage. That's when he heard it, a weak cry, almost imperceptible, that didn't belong in this desolate scene. James drew his flashlight and began walking among the piles of waste, following the sound that grew clearer with each step. His heart raced when the light revealed a small bundle moving slightly among soaked cardboard boxes. With trembling hands, he pushed aside the dirty papers and felt the air leave his lungs. There, wrapped in a thin, dirty blanket, was a newborn baby, still with remnants of umbilical cord. Her skin was purple from the cold, and the weak cry indicated she was fighting to survive. "My God," whispered James as he took off his coat to wrap the child. The contact with his body made the baby calm instantly, as if recognizing in those strong arms a safe haven after hours of abandonment. On the way to the hospital, James couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror, checking on the tiny passenger sleeping peacefully in the back seat. Something inside him had changed the moment he first held her, a familiar yet completely new sensation, as if a long-closed door in his heart was beginning to open. The pediatric emergency team acted swiftly as soon as James walked through the emergency doors with the small bundle in his arms. Dr. Emma Thompson, the attending pediatrician, examined the baby carefully while asking questions James couldn't answer. "She must have been born just hours ago," the doctor explained, checking the child's vital signs. "It's a miracle she survived so long exposed to the cold." "You got here just in time, Sergeant?" James watched through the NICU window as nurses tended to the baby. His shift had ended hours ago, but he couldn't leave. He felt responsible for this small life that fate had placed in his path. "She's responding well to treatment," said Emma, approaching with a cup of coffee. "But she'll need to stay hospitalized for a few days for observation." "What happens after that?" asked James, accepting the offered coffee. "Well, once she's cleared, she'll be sent to a shelter until they find a family to adopt her," Emma replied, studying the officer's expression. "Unless any relatives come forward." James felt his chest tighten at the thought of the baby being taken to a shelter. The words left his mouth before he could fully process them. "What if I wanted to adopt her?" Emma looked at the sergeant in surprise. "Are you serious?" "I don't know," James replied, running his hand through his graying hair. "I just know I can't bear the thought of her going to a shelter." "James, adoption is a complex process. There are evaluations, social visits, a series of legal requirements." Emma paused, choosing her words. "Besides, you're single, you have a high-risk job." "I can transfer departments," James interrupted, his voice growing firm. "I can request a transfer to administration. I own my house, have savings. And most importantly, I want to give her what someone denied her, a chance to be loved." Emma smiled, moved by the officer's determination. "Well, if you're really decided, I can connect you with a social worker I know. She can guide you through the first steps." The following hours passed in a blur as James filled out forms and answered preliminary questions from the social worker Emma had called. It felt as if each signature brought him closer to a future he had never imagined for himself. That night, returning to his empty house, James couldn't sleep. He spent hours staring at the guest room, imagining how he could transform it into a nursery. The gray walls would need color, the old furniture would have to make way for a crib, and the solitary routine he'd built over the years would need complete reorganization. In a corner of the room, a dusty box held the last memories of his marriage to Rachel, photos, cards, and unrealized dreams of a family that never came to be. Now that space could take on new meaning, filled with the cries and laughter of a child who needed love as much as he did. As dawn approached, James planned every detail of the new life unfolding before him. For the first time in years, the thought of change didn't frighten him. Instead, he felt new energy coursing through his veins, a purpose he had long lost. The image of the tiny baby fighting for life in that dump wouldn't leave his mind, as if it were a sign from fate showing that there was still room for new beginnings. The next morning, James arrived early at the hospital, carrying a small bag with diapers and baby clothes he'd bought on the way. The saleswomen at the children's store had smiled seeing the uniformed officer carefully choosing each item, asking about appropriate sizes and fabrics for a newborn. James found Emma doing her morning rounds, and the expression on her face made him stop in the middle of the hallway. There was something different in her eyes, a mix of concern and disbelief that made his stomach churn. "James, we need to talk," she said, leading him to her office. Her voice was grave, and her hands gripped a folder of test results too tightly. "We ran some routine tests on the baby and, well, there's something you need to know." James's heart raced, fearing bad news about the child's health. But what Emma would reveal next would change his life in a way he could never have imagined. She opened the folder slowly, and the words she spoke next made James's world stop spinning. "The DNA tests showed something extraordinary," Emma said, her voice barely containing her disbelief. She took a deep breath before continuing, her eyes fixed on James's. "This baby, she's your biological daughter?" The world stopped. The air grew thick, and James felt as if each heartbeat echoed off the office walls. His hands, calloused from years of holding a gun, began to shake uncontrollably. "We ran the test 3 times, Emma continued, spreading the results across the desk. Her fingers traced the lines of the report with scientific precision. 99.9% probability of paternity. There's no margin for error, James. This girl you found abandoned in that dump, she's yours." The impact of those words hit him like a punch to the stomach. James abruptly stood up, walking to the office window. Outside, the city continued its normal rhythm, oblivious to the storm brewing within these 4 walls. "How?" he finally managed to articulate, his voice almost unrecognizable. "How is this possible?" Detective Lisa Martinez arrived less than an hour after being notified. She was a woman in her 40s, with eyes that seemed to see through people and a notepad always at hand. Her professional demeanor barely disguised her perplexity at the case. "Sergeant Carter," she began, adjusting her heavy-framed glasses, "I need you to tell me absolutely everything about your relationships in the last 12 months. Every detail could be crucial." The interrogation lasted hours. James relived every moment of the past months, each casual encounter, each face that could have some connection to this mystery. That's when a specific memory emerged from the depths of his mind, like a drowning man surfacing. "The department party," he murmured, running his hands over his tired face. "End of last year at the officers' club. I wasn't well. It was the anniversary of my partner's death and I drank too much." Lisa leaned forward, her pencil dancing across the paper. James closed his eyes, forcing the hazy memories to take shape. There was a woman. Dark hair, light eyes. She said she worked in another district, that she'd also lost someone. We talked for hours about grief, about loneliness. His voice faltered. The next morning she was gone. No name, no number, nothing. While Lisa began her investigation, Emma took James to the NICU. In front of the incubator he observed his daughter with new eyes. Every detail of her tiny face seemed to tell a story. Her nose was definitely his, as was the shape of her chin. "Would you like to hold her?" asked Nurse N, noticing his lost gaze. Minutes later, James was sitting in a recliner, performing kangaroo care. The contact of his daughter's delicate skin against his chest was an overwhelming experience. Each of her breaths reverberated through him, creating a connection words couldn't describe. "Lily," he whispered, the name coming naturally. "You're my Lily." At home, the transformation began immediately. The guest room, previously a storage space for abandoned memories, took on new life. James worked tirelessly, painting walls, assembling furniture, preparing every detail for his daughter's arrival. An old box at the bottom of the closet caught his attention during the cleanup. Inside, photographs from his police academy days stared back at him. Young, determined, dreaming of a brilliant career. Now, 15 years later, his dreams had completely changed. At the precinct, the news spread like wildfire. Captain Anderson called him for an urgent meeting, but what James found was different than expected. A room full of colleagues waited, each carrying something: diapers, clothes, toys. "We're family, Carter," Anderson said, his usually stern voice softened by emotion. "And family takes care of each other." The transfer proposal to administration came next. James accepted without hesitation. His priorities had shifted. Now someone depended on him, needed him to come home every night. Lisa continued her investigation meticulously. Each party photo was analyzed, every name verified. "We have 53 women who attended the event," she reported during an update. "We've eliminated 37 who don't match the description or have confirmed alibis." Hospital nights became routine. James arrived after work, always carrying something new for Lily: a teddy bear, a musical mobile, a soft blanket. The nurses smiled seeing him, touched by the transformation of the tough cop into a devoted father. Emma monitored Lily's progress daily, but her concern went beyond professional. "She's growing strong," she commented one night, "but we need her maternal medical history. Some conditions are hereditary, James." It was during one of these vigils that James found the yellowed envelope among his old documents. The party photographs emerged like puzzle pieces, and there she was, the dark-haired woman, partially visible in one of the shots. His hands trembled as he dialed Lisa's number. "I found something," he said, his voice urgent. "A photo. She's here." The image was like a half-open door to a greater mystery. The woman in the photo, though partially obscured, seemed familiar in a way James couldn't explain. There was something about her posture, the way she leaned slightly to one side, that stirred a distant memory. Lisa arrived in less than 30 minutes, her keen eyes examining the photograph. "This changes everything," she murmured, already typing on her phone. "I'll request an image analysis immediately." As he watched Lisa work, James felt a shiver run down his spine. The feeling that he was on the verge of an even bigger discovery consumed him. The photo in his hands wasn't just a clue, it was the first step toward a truth that promised to shake the foundations of his life even more deeply. That night, back at the hospital, James held Lily tighter than usual. "We'll figure everything out, little one," he promised, kissing her delicate forehead. "No matter where this story takes us, it'll always be you and me." What James didn't know was that the answer to his questions was closer than he imagined, and that the truth, when it finally came to light, would be more surprising and painful than anyone could predict. The photo analysis revealed unexpected details. In the forensics lab, technician David Mitchell digitally enlarged the image, focusing on a mirror's reflection in the background. There, partially visible, was a police badge hanging from the mysterious woman's neck. "Can you make out the number?" Lisa asked, leaning over the monitor. David adjusted the contrast several times. "It's difficult, but it seems to end in 31. And look at this." He pointed to a detail on the uniform. "This specific insignia belongs to the Special Operations Division." James felt his heart race. The Special Operations Division was an elite unit, known for its secret missions and high level of discretion. The fact that the woman belonged to this unit explained why it had been so difficult to track her down. Lisa was already on the phone. "I need the records of all female DOE officers from the past 5 years, she ordered. "Especially those with badges ending in 31. As the investigation took new turns, James's life was split between the hospital and preparing to bring Lily home. The room was finally ready, delicately decorated in soft tones. A nursing chair occupied the corner by the window, an unexpected gift from his co-workers. "She's responding very well," Emma commented during one of the nightly checkups. "She's gained weight appropriately and her reflexes are excellent. I think we can discharge her in a few days." James spent every free moment with his daughter, learning to change diapers, give baths, and interpret her different types of crying. The nurses smiled seeing the tough cop softly humming to Lily during the early hours. It was during one of these nights that his phone vibrated with a message from Lisa. "Found something. Come to the station immediately." The clock showed 23:47 when James entered the investigation room. Lisa was surrounded by files and photos scattered across the desk. Her face revealed a mixture of shock and concern. "James, you need to sit down," she said, her voice softer than usual. "What did you find?" Lisa grabbed a folder and opened it slowly. The badge belonged to Lieutenant Catherine Wilson. She was one of DOE's best agents, specialized in infiltration. James noticed the use of past tense. "She died 3 months ago in a secret operation." Lisa paused, her eyes studying James's reaction. "Or at least, that's what everyone thought." James took the photo Lisa handed over. Catherine was even more beautiful than his hazy memory suggested. Her green eyes conveyed a piercing intensity, even through the photograph. "There's more," Lisa continued, hesitant. "Catherine was investigating a baby trafficking ring when she disappeared. The operation involved hospitals and illegal clinics." James's stomach tightened. "You're saying?" "Yes. We believe she discovered something big. Something that forced her into hiding. And then? She got pregnant," James completed, the pieces fitting together in his mind like a macabre puzzle. Lisa nodded. "But the story is even more complex. We found records that Catherine had a twin sister, Elizabeth. They were separated in childhood, after their parents' death." James felt the world spin. The party, the conversation about loss, the instant connection. Everything started to make sense in a disturbing way. "Elizabeth works as a nurse," Lisa continued, "at a private clinic that's under investigation for suspected involvement in the baby trafficking scheme." The silence that followed was deafening. James stared at Catherine's photo, trying to process the implications of this revelation. "So Lily might be in danger," he finally said, his voice trembling with concern. "Possibly. If Catherine discovered something important enough to go into hiding, and if her sister is indeed involved." Lisa didn't need to finish the sentence. James stood up abruptly. "I need to get back to the hospital. Now." The drive back was torture. Every red light seemed to last forever. James tried to stay calm, but his police instinct screamed that something was wrong. Arriving at the hospital, he ran through the corridors to the NICU. The first sign something was wrong was the abnormal silence of the ward. Where nurses usually circulated, there was now only emptiness. His heart nearly stopped when he reached the nursery. Lily's incubator was empty. "Where's my daughter?" he practically shouted at the first nurse he found. "Sergeant Carter?" "But the nurse from the previous shift said you had authorized the transfer." "What transfer? What nurse?" The young nurse trembled at James's intensity. "Elizabeth, she said it was an emergency transfer for special test." James felt his blood freeze in his veins. He pulled out his phone and dialed Lisa while running to the exit. She was here. Elizabeth took Lily. The next few minutes were a whirlwind. Police cars were dispatched, security camera footage requested, police barriers established at all city exits. In the hospital's control room, James watched the recordings with obsessive attention. Elizabeth had acted with surgical precision, using a hospital uniform and seemingly legitimate documents. The cameras showed her calmly leaving with a small bundle in her arms, entering an unmarked white van. "We have a partial plate," a technician announced. "And there's something else. Look at this." In the recording, Elizabeth paused briefly before entering the van. Her face turned directly to the camera as if wanting to be seen. And then she did something unexpected. She gestured in sign language. "Does anyone here understand sign language?" Lisa asked urgently. A nurse approached timidly. "I understand a little," she's saying. "Sister, danger, help." James and Lisa exchanged looks. "This isn't a normal kidnapping," Lisa concluded. "Elizabeth is trying to tell us something." "Doesn't matter," James replied, checking his weapon. "I'll find my daughter, even if I have to turn this city upside down." What no one knew was that this search would lead them to discover a much larger conspiracy than they imagined, where nothing and no one was exactly what they seemed to be. The night transformed into a massive police operation. James, nerves on edge, coordinated search teams while Lisa scoured every detail of the twin sisters' lives. The white van's trail led them to an abandoned warehouse in the industrial zone, where security cameras had recorded its passage less than an hour ago. "We have movement in Sector 7, an officer's voice crackled on the radio. A white van just entered a private clinic. Plates match. Santa Clara Clinic loomed imposingly in the darkness, its lit windows contrasting with the night. To the outside world, it was just another traditional private clinic. But Catherine's preliminary investigations had revealed a facade for something much more sinister. "The clinic has 5 floors and a basement," Lisa explained, spreading the building plans across the patrol car's hood. "Records show suspicious financial movements over the last 2 years. Large amounts in cash." James barely listened. His eyes were fixed on the building, imagining his little Lily somewhere inside. Each passing minute was torture. "We can't just raid," Lisa warned, noting his restlessness. "If Elizabeth is right and Catherine is in danger, a hasty action could put both of them and Lily at greater risk." That's when James's phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number: "Basement. Back door. 20 minutes. Come alone." "It's a trap," Lisa declared immediately upon seeing the message. Probably, James agreed, checking his weapon. But it's my only chance. The next minutes were spent preparing a silent operation. Tactical teams positioned themselves strategically around the building. James wore a bulletproof vest concealed under a regular jacket. "If you don't hear from me in 30 minutes, come in with everything," he instructed Lisa, handing her his badge. The approach to the back door was tortuously slow. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every noise made his heart race. The door was unlocked as promised. The clinic's basement was a maze of dimly lit corridors. The smell of cleaning products couldn't completely mask a more sinister odor, something medical and artificial. The walls, painted in an institutional shade of light green, seemed to absorb the fluorescent light. A distant baby's cry made James freeze. His paternal instinct immediately identified it. It was Lily. He followed the sound, moving like a shadow through the corridors, years of police training guiding each step. He turned a corner and nearly collided with Elizabeth. She put a finger to her lips, signaling silence, and gestured for him to follow. "Catherine is alive," Elizabeth whispered as they walked. She discovered the clinic is at the center of an international baby trafficking ring. But they caught her before she could gather all the evidence. "Where's my daughter?" James asked, his voice tense with worry. "With Catherine. It was the only way to keep her safe after they discovered the pregnancy." Elizabeth stopped in front of a door marked "Dead Files." They were going to take Lily as soon as she was born. Catherine escaped, had the baby in secret, but knew she was being hunted. Abandoning Lily where you would find her was our last option. James processed the information, feeling a mix of anger and understanding. "Why didn't you come directly to me?" "Because the organization has people infiltrated in the police," a new voice answered. Catherine emerged from a side room, Lily safe in her arms. She was thinner than in the photo, with deep circles under her eyes, but her green eyes maintained the same intensity. The reunion was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Elizabeth quickly led them to a storage room, silently closing the door behind them. "We need the evidence," Catherine whispered, cradling Lily. "It's all on a server on the 3rd floor. With it, we can expose the entire operation." James watched his daughter, now sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. The scene he had dreamed of seeing was finally before him, but in the most unlikely circumstances possible. "Dr. Morgan is suspicious," Elizabeth warned. "Since Catherine disappeared, he's reinforced security. There are armed men on every floor." "Dr. Morgan?" James asked. "Maxwell Morgan," Catherine explained, her face hardening. "The clinic's director. The man behind everything. He personally oversees each international adoption, as they call it. Children sold to the highest bidder." The sound of voices in the corridor silenced them. Heavy footsteps were approaching their position. "Check every room," an authoritative voice ordered. "They're here somewhere." James exchanged looks with Catherine and Elizabeth. Time was running out. They needed a plan and fast. "Is there another way out?" he whispered. Elizabeth pointed to a ventilation grate in the ceiling. "It leads to the duct system. Can take us to the 3rd floor." James checked his watch. 15 minutes had passed since he entered the building. Soon, Lisa would start the raid, which could be disastrous if the evidence wasn't secured. Catherine gently passed Lily to Elizabeth's arms. "You need to get her out of here," she told her sister. "Use the route we planned. James and I will get the evidence." Elizabeth hesitated, looking at her niece. "What if something goes wrong?" "Then you'll be Plan B," Catherine replied, handing her a flash drive. "All the information I've gathered so far is here. If we don't return in an hour, give it to the police." James felt his heart tighten watching Lily being taken away. But he knew it was the only option. Elizabeth was the only one who knew the clinic's secret routes, having worked there for years. "Keep our daughter safe," he asked, gently touching Lily's head one last time. Elizabeth solemnly nodded and disappeared through a side door, just as the sound of keys began jingling on the other side of the main door. James and Catherine exchanged looks. They didn't need words to know that the next few minutes would determine not just their fates, but the future of dozens of families affected by this criminal scheme. The doorknob began to turn slowly. The doorknob completed its torturous turn, and James reacted on instinct. With a quick movement, he pushed a heavy shelf against the door while Catherine opened the ventilation grate. "This way," she whispered urgently, already pulling herself into the duct. The metal groaned under their weight as they crawled through the ventilation system. Below them, raised voices and sounds of doors being broken down echoed through the corridors. James followed Catherine through the metal maze, each movement calculated to make as little noise as possible. The server is in a special room, Catherine explained in whispers. Temperature-controlled, restricted access. Morgan is obsessed with security, uses biometric authentication. How do we get in? A tense smile crossed Catherine's face. Let's say I kept a souvenir from my last visit there. She pulled a small vial from her pocket containing what looked like a piece of silicone. His fingerprint. Through the ventilation slats, James observed the movement on the floors. Armed guards patrolled the corridors, weapons drawn. The situation was even more serious than they'd imagined. They reached a grate that accessed the third floor. Catherine signaled for silence and pointed to a door at the end of the corridor, the server room. 2 armed men stood guard. We need a distraction, James murmured. As if answering his request, a distant explosion shook the building. The lights flickered and sirens began to wail. Lisa, James smiled. Always punctual. The guards exchanged glances, undecided between maintaining their positions or investigating the commotion. Over the radio, urgent requests for reinforcement on the ground floor made them decide. They ran toward the stairs. Catherine quickly removed the grate and they slid into the corridor. In seconds they were at the server room door. The silicone mold worked perfectly in the biometric reader. The room was a sanctuary of technology. Rows of servers hummed softly, lights blinking like mechanical fireflies. Catherine ran to a terminal, her fingers flying over the keyboard. I need a few minutes, she said, inserting a transfer device. There are 5 years of operation records here. Names, dates, transactions? Catherine? The voice made them both freeze. Dr. Maxwell Morgan stood in the doorway, a revolver pointed firmly in their direction. His aristocratic face wore an expression of paternal disappointment. My best agent, he sighed. So much wasted potential. Do you know how many families we could have helped if you had cooperated? Helped? Catherine spat the words. You steal babies from vulnerable mothers and sell them to the highest bidder. I give these children a better life, Morgan responded calmly. Wealthy families, first-class education, opportunities they would never have. The money is just an incentive to optimize the process. James observed the scene, his mind working furiously. The device continued transferring data, a progress bar slowly advancing on the screen. What about the mothers? Catherine asked, keeping Morgan distracted. The ones you drugged during delivery to steal their babies? Necessary details, Morgan shrugged. Most don't even remember. And those who do, well, who would believe a disturbed single mother against a respectable institution like ours? A movement at the door caught James's attention. For a fraction of a second, he saw Elizabeth's signal. His heart froze. She should have been far away with Lily. Where is the child? Morgan suddenly asked. Your daughter, Catherine. Where did you hide her? Safe from you, Catherine replied, her body tense as a spring. Morgan laughed. No one is safe from me. I have people everywhere. In the police, in the judiciary, even in the sound of a gun being cocked interrupted him. Elizabeth was behind him, her revolver pressed against his neck. In the nursing staff, she completed. Not anymore, doctor. That's when the true twist revealed itself. Elizabeth moved to stand beside Morgan, but instead of subduing him, she pointed her gun at Catherine and James. I'm sorry, sister, she said, her voice carrying a different emotion now. But he's right. The system works. Catherine turned pale. Elizabeth, why? Because she understands the bigger picture, Morgan smiled. Your sister has been my most loyal collaborator for years. She's the one who alerted me about your suspicions, who monitored your pregnancy. Where's my daughter? James interrupted, his blood boiling. Elizabeth smiled sadly. With her true family. A house in London, wealthy parents, guaranteed future. It's better this way. The world seemed to slow down. James saw the horror in Catherine's eyes, Morgan's triumphant smile, the cold determination on Elizabeth's face. The device on the screen showed 97% transfer. That's when true chaos erupted. A much closer explosion shook the building, shattering the windows. Lisa and the tactical team had finally reached the third floor. In the moment of distraction, Catherine lunged at her sister while James charged at Morgan. The sound of gunshots echoed through the room, mixing with screams and falling equipment. Amid the chaos, a child's voice cut through the air, a familiar cry that made James's heart stop. What happened next would forever change the fate of everyone present in that room. Lily's crying echoed through the server room, paralyzing everyone present. In the doorway, a young nurse held the baby, her eyes wide at the chaotic scene. Jennifer, get out of here. Elizabeth shouted, still aiming her gun. But the nurse didn't move. I can't do this anymore, she sobbed. Not after today, not after seeing so many mothers. Morgan took advantage of the distraction to push James and try to reach an exit, but Catherine was faster. With a precise movement, she took him down, years of police training evident in every gesture. Elizabeth, Catherine pleaded while restraining Morgan, look at her. Look at your niece. Is this really what you want for her? A life built on lies? Elizabeth's face betrayed a devastating internal conflict. Her hand holding the gun began to shake. You don't understand, she whispered. I've seen so many children getting a second chance. Wealthy families, first-class education. At what cost? James intervened, his voice heavy with emotion. The suffering of other families? The trauma of mothers who never knew what happened to their babies? Elizabeth looked at Jennifer, who still held Lily. The baby had calmed down, her tiny eyes fixed on her aunt as if understanding the gravity of the moment. It's been 15 years, Elizabeth continued, tears streaming down her face. 15 years watching abandoned babies, addicted mothers, deplorable situations. Morgan offered a solution. A criminal solution, Catherine exclaimed. He doesn't help these mothers, he exploits them. He drugs his patients, forges documents, tears families apart. The sound of boots in the hallway indicated the tactical team was approaching. Morgan, still immobilized, started laughing. You don't understand, he said. This is bigger than all of us. I have connections at every level. In 24 hours I'll be free and none of this. A gunshot cut through the air. Elizabeth had fired, the bullet hitting the main server. Sparks flew as the equipment short-circuited. What have you done? Morgan screamed. Elizabeth smiled sadly. I destroyed your connections. Catherine's device has already copied everything. There's no going back now. That's when Lisa and the tactical team burst into the room. In seconds, Morgan was handcuffed and being dragged out. Elizabeth Wilson, Lisa began. You're? No, Catherine interrupted. She's with me. Undercover agent. James and Lisa exchanged surprised looks as Elizabeth dropped the gun, a sob escaping her lips. I'm sorry, she said, looking at Catherine. I should have told you before, but I needed to maintain my cover. Years undercover, gathering evidence, gaining his trust. When you showed up pregnant, You protected me, Catherine finished, finally understanding. Lily's abandonment? It was the only way to keep her safe until we had enough evidence, Elizabeth confirmed. I knew James would find her. I was monitoring his patrol that night. Jennifer approached with Lily, handing her to James. The officer held his daughter tightly, silent tears running down his face. She was never in danger, Elizabeth assured. Jennifer is one of ours. Part of a much larger operation investigating child trafficking networks across the country. Catherine hugged her sister, years of distrust and pain dissolving into understanding and relief. In the days that followed, the true extent of the operation came to light. Dozens of similar clinics were shut down. Hundreds of families finally discovered what had happened to their babies. A meticulous reconnection work began, with teams of social workers and psychologists helping in the reunification process. Morgan and his main collaborators were arrested. The evidence was irrefutable, years of records detailing every transaction, every family involved, every payment received. For James and Catherine, however, the focus was elsewhere. In their apartment, now transformed into a welcoming home, they were beginning to build their own family. Lily grew strong and healthy, surrounded by the love of her parents and her Aunt Elizabeth, who had become a constant presence in their lives. One night, while putting Lily to bed, James watched Catherine rocking their daughter. The scene seemed like a miracle, a gift from fate that began on a dark night at a municipal dump. What are you thinking about? Catherine asked, noticing his distant gaze. About how unpredictable life is, he replied, approaching to kiss Lily's forehead. A few months ago I was a lonely police officer and now you have a family, she completed, smiling. A slightly different family, perhaps, with a complicated history. But ours, he concluded, embracing them both. Outside, the city continued its normal rhythm, oblivious to the small miracle unfolding in that apartment. A miracle that began with abandonment, went through betrayals and revelations, but ended as it should, with love. Elizabeth watched the scene from the doorway, her heart finally at peace. Years of secrets and sacrifices had been worth it. Her niece was safe, her sister happy, and dozens of other families would have the chance to heal and reconnect. James's phone vibrated, a message from Lisa. Last clinic closed today. It's over? He looked at his family and smiled. No, he thought it wasn't over. It was just beginning. 5 years had passed since that fateful night at Santa Clara Clinic. Time, as always, brought changes and healed wounds, transforming a story of pain into a testimony of hope and redemption. James, now 43, watched his daughter Lily playing in the garden of their new house. Her dark curls danced in the wind as she chased soap bubbles, her crystalline laughter echoing through the sunny afternoon. Catherine, sitting beside him on the porch, rested her hand on her 7-month pregnant belly. Soon, Lily would have a little brother. "Daddy, look!" Lily shouted, showing a butterfly that had landed on her outstretched hand. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, sparkled with enchantment. James smiled, still amazed at how his life had changed. After the Morgan case closed, he decided to permanently accept the administrative position in the police force, coordinating training for new recruits. His field stories, especially the night he found Lily, became legendary at the academy. Catherine remained in the police force but transferred to the Crimes Against Children unit. Her personal experience made her especially effective in cases of child trafficking and exploitation. Under her leadership, the unit achieved an unprecedented case resolution rate. Elizabeth, after testifying against Morgan and his associates, dedicated herself to a special project, a non-profit organization that helped reconnect families separated by illegal adoption schemes. The process was delicate and often painful, but the successful reunions made everything worthwhile. "Aunt Beth is late," Lily commented, running to sit between her parents. As if summoned by her niece's words, Elizabeth appeared at the gate, carrying a folder and her inseparable laptop. In recent years, the worry lines on her face had been replaced by smile lines. "Sorry I'm late," she said, hugging Lily. "We had an important meeting today. We managed to locate 3 more families." The news was met with knowing smiles. Each reunited family was a small victory against Morgan's dark legacy. The doctor, sentenced to 30 years in prison, was still trying to reduce his sentence through appeals, but the evidence was irrefutable. Lisa, who had become a close family friend, arrived soon after with her husband David, the forensic technician who had helped analyze the photos years ago. Their relationship had blossomed during the long nights working on the Morgan case. "We brought a surprise," Lisa announced, handing an envelope to James. Inside were photos of the old Santa Clara Clinic, now transformed into a support center for mothers in vulnerable situations. The project, funded with money confiscated from the criminal organization, offered medical, psychological, and social assistance. "Jennifer is doing incredible work as coordinator," Lisa commented. The young nurse who had helped save Lily had found her calling helping other mothers and children. While the adults talked, Lily played with her dolls, occasionally including her future baby sister in her plans. "Lucy will love playing with me," she declared, having already decided the baby's name. Catherine smiled, remembering how they came up with Lily's name. "It was your father who chose your name," she told her for the 100th time, "because Lily always asked to hear the story. Because you're like a flower that grew in impossible circumstances." The little girl smiled, already knowing every word of the story but never tiring of hearing it. For her, her family was perfectly normal, a hero father, a brave mother, and an aunt who always brought interesting gifts from her travels around the country. James watched his daughter run back to the garden, his heart overflowing with gratitude. The pain of Rachel's abandonment, the loneliness of the following years, the loss of his partner, everything seemed to be part of a necessary path that led him to this moment. "Sometimes I still think about that night," he confessed softly to Catherine. "If I had ignored that faint cry, if I had arrived a few minutes later." Catherine squeezed his hand gently. "But you didn't ignore it. You found her. And that changed not just our lives, but hundreds of other families' lives." It was true. The Morgan case had exposed an international baby trafficking network, leading to similar investigations in other countries. Elizabeth's work helped create stricter protocols for international adoptions, preventing other children from being separated from their families. The afternoon progressed in a quiet celebration of family and friendship. Lily insisted that everyone participate in her improvised tea party, serving water with cookies in her toy cups. Even the most serious adults surrendered to her sweet authority. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, James gathered everyone for a photo. Elizabeth set up the camera timer and ran to join the group. At the last moment, Lily jumped into her father's lap, her smile illuminating the entire scene. The flash captured a moment of pure happiness, not the perfect happiness of fairy tales, but the real kind, built on healed scars and true love. A family formed not by blood or documents, but by choices, sacrifices, and a love that overcame all adversities. Later, after the guests had left and Lily fell asleep, James found Catherine on the porch, contemplating the stars. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, embracing her from behind. "About how unpredictable life is," she replied, echoing the words he had spoken years ago. "About how fate sometimes uses twisted paths to take us exactly where we need to be." James kissed her forehead softly. The future still held challenges. There would always be more families to help, more stories to tell, more battles to fight. But now they had something that no adversity could shake: each other and the unconditional love of a little girl who had transformed their lives forever. In the room next door, Lily slept peacefully, her small chest rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. On her dresser, a framed photo captured a precious moment: James holding her for the first time at the hospital, his eyes filled with tears, while Catherine watched with love. A moment that marked not just the beginning of a family, but also the start of a redemption story that would continue to touch lives for generations. This all proves that true love can flourish in the most unlikely circumstances, that family is much more than blood ties, and that sometimes the greatest miracles begin with a simple act of courage. What did you think of this touching story? What would you do in James's position upon discovering that the abandoned baby was his biological daughter? And how would you react to discovering the whole truth behind Catherine and Elizabeth's mystery? Share your opinions in the comments. We love reading each one. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like. And to not miss any other touching narrative like this one, subscribe now to the Life Stories channel. Each like and subscription helps us continue sharing truly inspiring stories that make us believe in the power of love, family, and overcoming adversity. Also turn on the notification bell to be the first to know about our next incredible stories. Until the next emotional adventure.